I don't know about you guys, but I can't go 5 minutes without seeing the question, is DBD dying somewhere? Either a content creator talks about it, or you'll see it in a YouTube thumbnail along with those really annoying Wojak faces, red circles with arrows, and let's add Mr. Beast for good measure. Wait, hold on. Technically there's quotation marks there, so I'm actually quoting other people and not saying it myself, so have a solid legal defense. Okay, yeah, pot kettle, I know. Okay, answering the question to avoid making this video clickbait, no. Dead by Daylight is not dying and probably won't be anytime soon. Wait, don't click off the video yet. Please, I worked so hard on it. Sorry. Anyway, some folks may see these thumbnails and get the impression that DBD is on its last legs, but that couldn't be further from the truth. A quick peep at the Steam chart shows you that the game is doing pretty well, and even better lately since Behavior released the Alien chapter. You know, one of the biggest and most recognizable horror franchises of all time. The future looks better than bright for the game, so you may be wondering why people are saying stuff like this, and honestly, it kind of varies from person to person. Despite lacking any ground to stand on, you'll still hear people saying that the game is in a bad state, or losing players, or some other stuff in the same vein. This statement can come from pretty much anywhere. Maybe there's a perk the person absolutely hates, maybe Behavior nerfed a killer they liked, or maybe they just played a game on RPD. It could honestly be just about anything. Even though the game definitely isn't dying, there is a common cause for people saying these things. Many people are just burnt out on Dead by Daylight. This burnout, as most people call it, directs most people towards getting angrier and angrier at the game until it becomes almost comical. Like, the way people talk about this game is absolutely unhinged. You'd get the impression that some people think DBD punched them square in the jaw and then took a shit on their coffee table. It's fucking batshit, and I guess it just comes from that burnout. Now, the intelligent people in the audience today might say something along the lines of, well, shouldn't these players quit the game or take a break? Well, I'd say yes. I totally got you there, didn't I? Okay. Jokes aside, it isn't that simple, especially for people who make a living off the game. The problem with giving up DBD is that there's nothing you can really replace it with. Dead by Daylight is one of a kind, and if you were to get mad at the game and give up, you'd be giving up an entire genre of games entirely. This is why when a new asymmetrical game is announced or released, it becomes a huge deal, and you'll see everybody in the DBD sphere talking about it. I'm sure for many of you, one very recent example comes to mind. This isn't a new thing though. New ASIMs coming out and causing people to question the lifespan of DBD is a tale as old as time. However, none of them have really done any damage to DBD long term. I mean, come on. Dead by Daylight is to asymmetrical games as Fortnite is to Battle Royale games. The game is almost unstoppable, and most other games that try to do the same thing have a very high, almost impossible ladder to climb. The big question regarding these other ASIMs is, did DBD outlast them because it's just better, or were there other factors at play? This question varies from game to game, so let's cover a few. Oh, just FYI, I won't be covering every asymmetrical game ever made. I'll only be talking about games made after the release of DBD and maybe took at least a little inspiration from it or offered some sort of competition for the game. So if any of you smartasses head to the comments and start complaining that I didn't talk about Left 4 Dead Versus or Evolve.
Evolve is no joke. This is a gamer's game. New wave of the next generation.
I'm going to lose my mind. Another quick thing, I'll be referring to each side as Killer and Survivor bar the last game, even if they're technically called something else. Primarily because it'll be easier to understand and I'm incredibly lazy and every fucking game switches it. I'm so tired of it. Just put a Killer Survivor. So much simpler. Anyway, let's continue. As you could probably tell, this video ended up being pretty long, so make sure to grab a snack, grab a beverage, and let's just sit down and enjoy the ride.
My boy. My sweet Jason.
You've all probably heard about this one by now. Friday the 13th, the game, was released in 2017 and became a huge deal. Like, seriously, everybody was playing the game. Hundreds of content creators made gameplay videos about it while playing with their friends, way more than DBD ever had in 2017. The game was, how you say, an instant hit, and took many Dead by Daylight players with it when it was released. So, you're probably wondering why DBD isn't dead. We'll get there. First, let's talk about what Friday the 13th, the game, was all about. A very large factor in this game's immediate popularity was, of course, the license. It'd be hard to find a franchise more iconic of horror than Friday the 13th. Everybody knows about the big boy with the hockey mask and machete. Jason Voorhees, Tommy Jarvis, Crystal Lake. Even if you've never watched a Friday the 13th film, you've probably seen these characters or know the place at least a little bit. The promise of getting to basically play through one of the movies was enough to get a ton of people on board. It became, like I said, a massive hit. While Dead by Daylight had Michael Myers, Laurie Strode, and Haddonfield, people were still unsure about DBD's future, and the game was absolutely dwarfed in size compared to Friday the 13th. Dead by Daylight wasn't the monarch it is today, which led to many people jumping ship as soon as the opportunity appeared. Despite appearing similar from a bird's eye view, the games were drastically different regarding design. While some people classify DBD as a party game, Friday the 13th is a party game! It's an absolute blast to play with friends. Thanks to things like the huge maps, variety of escape methods, silly animations, a large number of players per game, proximity chat, having who's playing Jason randomly selected, RNG, everything, replayability was huge when playing with a group of people you knew. You could even do minimal amounts of trolling by talking to Jason and telling him where your teammates were to get him off your back, which I have done more than once. While behavior was still tripping over themselves trying to figure out what they wanted DBD to be, it seemed like Friday the 13th already had the formula they wanted. A game with a fun loop that was more focused on a group of people having fun together instead of focusing on skill seemed to be the goal, and they executed it very well by today's standards. However, what seemed like a game that could last forever quickly formed cracks that the devs could never have seen coming. Using a licensed property is always a little scary, as the people who own said license can decide to sucker punch you and screw up whatever you're working on. For example, if Behavior decides one day that they'd like to add a shirtless Nemesis skin, which I'm rooting for by the way, they would have to talk to Capcom, who own Resident Evil, in advance to make sure they're okay with it being added. If Behavior decide to add it without consulting them first, it could lead to a mess of legal trouble and money loss, which obviously neither of them want. Some license holders tend to be more lenient than others, which is why we have a ton of Ghostface skins, but none for Freddy or Quentin. I know you're probably thinking to yourself, wait, how does this apply to Friday the 13th? It isn't DBD, it's a game based entirely on a franchise, not just adding stuff from it every once in a while. Well, unfortunately it isn't that simple. Meet Victor Miller and Sean Cunningham, or as I call them, Redmond and Plutarch. Redmond, or Victor Miller, is the original screenwriter for the first Friday the 13th movie, and Plutarch, Sean Cunningham, is the director of the same movie and one of the producers of multiple other movies in the franchise. Redmond claims he's the rightful owner of Jason Voorhees and Friday the 13th, and is trying to claim his work after 35 years. Obviously, Plutarch isn't cool with that, so they've been in legal limbo for a long time, fighting to determine whether or not the property is theirs. Unfortunately, neither of them called Saul, because this legal hell went on for ages. Wonder why, in a world of reboots and sequels, we haven't gotten a new Friday the 13th movie? Well, this is why. Not only did the legal problem extend to the big screen, but to the game on top of it. The legal hell this franchise was in was a huge damper on the game, due to the variety and quantity of hoops that IllFonic, the company that developed Friday the 13th the game, had to go through made it insanely difficult to get things done. In most cases, it would be the owner of the intellectual property who would give permission to IllFonic to keep adding things and updating the game, but due to the lawsuit, no one could allow the release of any new content from the franchise. This game of tug the rope left IllFonic out to dry many times, making adding new content almost impossible. Many people blame the licensing issues for the game's losing players, but I'm not quite sure that's it. Games can survive for a long time without getting new content. As long as the game is consistently fun and has decent depth in terms of skill, you can keep a game alive for a long time. Just look at TF2 for example. Valve didn't give TF2 a major update for 6 years, and the game was still doing pretty damn well for that time. Yeah, it's free, but I would argue price has almost nothing to do with it. So what happened with Friday the 13th? As I said, the game is definitely more party-oriented. It focuses a lot more on being fun than fair. Now, many people will be annoyed at me saying this given the whole Texas Chainsaw Massacre arguing, but in my opinion, wildly unbalanced games just aren't fun. At least not for very long. You can get some simple enjoyment out of something being badly designed and laugh at how stupid it is, but once that bliss goes away, guess what? So does the fun. The problem with Friday the 13th, the game, is that it was immensely unbalanced towards the people playing as survivors. Like most games in the genre, if you knew what you were doing, you could make the life of a Jason player a living hell as they were forced to watch, helpless to do anything to stop it. Remember that this game came out in 2017, and if you played DBD back then, you probably know it was also pretty badly balanced. However, DBD wasn't nearly as bad, and even if people thought it was, there is still a lot of skill and depth to Dead by Daylight that you could learn. Friday just lacked that depth. I mean, Jason could be strong in the right hands, but there wasn't much skill involved. As Jason, you had 4 different abilities to use and some traps and projectiles, but they were all surface level and would take at most 3 games to understand fully. This made it so you never felt like there was much to learn, and since survivors could make chases last minutes in some cases, it felt pointless. It's important to note that the more conventional escape methods like the car or the boat enabled players to work together, but that was more of an optional choice. Due to having more escape methods, it was much harder to guard and patrol areas to find survivors, as they could work on these objectives independently if they wanted to. This turned what was once a fun game to play with friends or even on your own into an absolute slog if you knew what you were doing. On top of that, it wasn't just the speed of objectives that made the game difficult. Do you think bullying is bad in Dead by Daylight? Well, you have no idea what it was like for Jason players. In Friday the 13th, survivors could grab melee weapons or hell, even ranged weapons to stun Jason temporarily. If the survivors wanted to, they could just all gang up on Jason and beat his ass with nothing to stop it. If Jason ended up grabbing a survivor, if you were close by or had some means to stun him, you could just make him drop whoever he was carrying. Think a flashlight save from DBD, but without needing good timing, which, as you can imagine, was a blast to play against. Hey yo, future Skrump here, or past Skrump, because by the time you see this video, you know, it would be in the past. Whatever. Doesn't matter. One thing worth mentioning is that if Jason picked you up, you were just dead, because a lot of the time he'd be able to use these executions, and, you know, when he grabbed you, he could just perform one of these executions and you'd be dead, and the only way you could come back is if someone called Tommy Jarvis and you ended up taking the role of Tommy Jarvis. Which does make Jason sound pretty strong, and in circumstances where you were alone and had nothing to defend yourself, yeah, it was. However, you could find these items around the map called pocket knives, and when Jason picked you up, if you had a pocket knife in your inventory, you would stab him and get off scot-free pretty much. These items are incredibly annoying, and I played a single game as Jason in a public match for this video, and I just want to throw together a little compilation of every single time I get stunned to give you an idea of what it was like for Jason players with this actually like public match I played. So enjoy. Jesus Christ. So, as you can imagine, regardless of however you try to attack the survivors, they'd still end up stunning you in some way, whether it was melee attacks or if you grab them using a pocket knife or firecrackers, a shotgun, flare gun, whatever, you were getting stunned 90% of the time. Hilariously, the icing on the cake was that you could even kill Jason by doing some convoluted bullshit with his mask and mother's sweater. These forms of attacking Jason did not help the already miserable time Jason could have when trying to win matches. We'll never know exactly what the future of this game could have looked like, because even if the devs knew what to do to keep the game alive, the licensing problems threw a wrench into anything they might have had planned. The game, in the state it was in, began to feel like a chore to play once people started getting good at it. Again, playing with friends is fun, but that's the case for every game. A combination of these things really caused the game to fall off, and due to the license expiring at the end of this year, the game already has its funeral planned. You're probably thinking to yourself, damn dude, this guy's really tearing into this like fun to play with friends party game. But I have to do it because when I talk about Texas Chainsaw Massacre, I kind of need to set the standard because people are gonna freak the fuck out, and I need to, like, you know, I understand that the game was not meant to be looked at like this, but you know, I'm going to need to look at another game like this, so I'm just, you know, preparing everyone for how I'm going to talk about Texas Chainsaw. Remember this game? Yeah, I totally forgot about it until I started working on this video. Home Sweet Home Survive came out in March 2021, much into DBD's lifespan. There was a big gap between 2017 and 2021. At that point, the game had earned its reputation as the king of the genre, as it had faced no threatening competition after Friday the 13th died off. I mean, it could have, but I can't find any notable asymmetrical games that came out during that time, despite my research. Home Sweet Home Survive is a sequel, or spin-off something of a game with the same name, just without the survive part. The first game was a single-player horror experience where you follow one guy trying to hide from an undead Japanese schoolgirl? At least that's what I remember when I played it. Making the jump from a single-player horror game to an asymmetrical multiplayer game is a little jarring, but hey, power to you guys. That's a risky choice, but it's creative. Sometimes you can make the choice similar to that and strike absolute gold. As I said, Home Sweet Home Survive came out in March 2021. In case you're curious, Dead by Daylight had just reworked the clown's power and turned the UI into a game of I Spy around that time. Needless to say, it was released during an era where people were questioning DBD's future, which may or may not have contributed to an instant interest by many people in the asymmetrical sphere. Guess we'll never know, but how was the actual game? Let's dive in and take a holy shit. I guess this tells you how the game is doing now. So what the hell happened here? After a long time of no DBD competition, games started taking more and more cues from it because, hey, it's doing well, clearly they've got it figured out. Which is why all the games we'll talk about after Friday the 13th are a lot more DBD-like. Home Sweet Home Survive was much more focused on high-paced and tight gameplay, instead of attempts at hide-and-seek we're used to seeing from other games in the genre. Seems like a great idea, right? Avoiding the more boring and problematic parts of games like this? Sign me up. The game had a pretty similar premise to DBD. There were these little corpse guys hanging around, and the survivors were supposed to perform rituals with them to get out. Basically, the generators are the objective of the game. You had to find items to start the process, but there were only 3 instead of the 5 objectives we tend to see because we're used to DBD. It was pretty straightforward. If a survivor was executed, you had a lot of time to find their soul, I think, and bring them to a place where you could revive them. If they died again, they were dead for realsies. There was one problem though. The game was super unbalanced. Guess which side it was aimed towards? Of course, the killer side was much harder. Let's start with the more fundamental stuff. Most recognizable off the bat, the killer is in third person, not first. This is a lot more of a problem than you'd think it would be. While games like Friday the 13th could get away with this, because the game wasn't meant to be focused on being accurate or doing well, games where accuracy is key, like this one, need to be easy to tell exact distance and where an attack is going to land, especially on ranged killers like the Nymph. This was enough to cause concern on its own to me, but combined with much slidier movement on both sides in comparison to DBD, you'd end up missing more often than not. On Survivor, you had this same issue, but obviously it was a lot less damaging as a survivor than a killer. However, things like a third-person camera can be learned over time. Even if it's rough in the beginning, eventually you'll figure out how to spread the peanut butter on the bread. Okay, yeah, I like analogies. You'd get used to it, is all I'm trying to say. The balance of the game is really where a majority of problems come into the light. It wasn't nearly as bad as Friday the 13th, but that doesn't mean the game didn't have its issues. When it came down to it, survivors just had too damn much to work with. I won't cover everything because I already spent a really long time on Friday and don't want to make this video a review of every game I talk about, but I have a feeling that's what it's going to turn into anyway, so who cares. Home Sweet Home Survive was pretty difficult for a killer. And when I say difficult, I mean difficult. In all fairness, the game didn't have the time to adapt and adjust like Dead by Daylight did, so it had the potential to be incredibly unfun for killers without the ability to make quick changes to fix it. Some of these unfun aspects included things like walls and doors that you had to break to progress a chase, basically a god pallet, ways for the survivor to teleport, or a form of vaulting without the ability to hit them in an animation. Basically instant teleports that you could use throughout the map. Things like vents and pots were able to be, used to teleport the survivors. It was fucking weird. And then you had these high drops that the killer couldn't follow them through to progress a chase. There's just a lot of stuff that the killer couldn't do much to prevent, which caused a good amount of frustration, as you can imagine. There was also the abundance of annoying as shit items that survivors could find in various places around the map. Items that could block entire doorways that the killer couldn't move through, a ranged item that blinded the killer which also stacked if multiple were thrown, and then a sword which you could use to stun the killer if you got a hit. I'm sure there were more, but these are the only ones I remember. As you can tell, the survivors had a lot at their disposal, and you can imagine how 4 survivors who knew what they were doing could make the game a chore to play. And I haven't even talked about how survivors had a stamina bar that allowed them to move faster than the killer unless it was fully depleted, leading to a lot of situations where you would just have to hug a survivor's ass until you were sure they were out of stamina to hit them. It was nasty.
You basically, it seems like the whole meta is chasing them and sticking on their ass until they run out of stamina, in which then they can't really dodge a hit whatsoever.
The weird approach at balance in Home Sweet Home became very noticeable pretty quickly. Despite getting a lot of attention from some big DBD content creators, the notoriety didn't last long. Once people realized that the game was unbalanced, they started moving on because the game wasn't fun enough to keep players engaged. Friday the 13th was able to keep a small but respectable community because it was party-oriented, and the balance could be forgiven because of that. Home Sweet Home lacked that get-out-of-jail-free card because it was aimed towards being a competitive game over everything else, and once players noticed this, they had nothing to stay for. So for this game in particular, it is a situation where Dead by Daylight was just the better game. Like, there wasn't any licensing issues with this game in particular, so this was just a case of the game was unbalanced, people started flocking back to DBD once they noticed. I'm not entirely sure where this game could have ended up. I opened up the game to try to get some footage for it. I couldn't find a match, unsurprisingly, but they did add some stuff after this, so I'm not quite sure if they ever made any huge changes to fix balance or anything like that. So for all I know, they fixed everything, but obviously people had given up at that point. Anyway, let's move on. Let's go on a trip down memory lane, folks. Late 2021. The Dead by Daylight Resident Evil chapter had come out and released in a very buggy state. Skill-based matchmaking was being pushed down everyone's throat and made players furious that DBD of all games was trying to force more competitive play, and Parkview Entertainment was using Pinhead's inclusion in DBD as a way to make money off of NFTs. Needless to say, Survivor and Killer mains alike were pissed, jaded, and annoyed. Players wanted some kind of hope, some kind of savior to end their miserable addiction to Dead by Daylight, but where could they go? Home Sweet Home Survive was dead in the water, and it seemed like nothing could change that. Things seemed absolutely hopeless for these jaded players. But out of nowhere, like Jesus Christ himself descending from heaven, Video Horror Society, or VHS, took center stage. An asymmetrical game that seemed to have a lot of potential. It had a nice aesthetic, a different art style, much more action-packed gameplay, and pretty incredible music. Just listen to this shit. People finally saw a bit of light shining in the dark pit DBD had them in, a potential savior to the lost souls that had given up hope that a game could kill Dead by Daylight. Content creators picked up on this instantly. Ottstarva, Dowsy, Jay, Trickster Shadow, Spooky Loops, streamers and YouTubers who were interested in giving the game a try. Countless videos talking about a crazy competitor to DBD that could make some sort of difference. People were ecstatic. Something fresh, something new. A game with so much hype around it that even behavior started to notice and got a little worried about DBD's future. There was a catch though. Not everyone could play it. The game wasn't accessible to everyone. Hellbent Games, the creators of Video Horror Society, were very selective in who could play the game. A closed beta kept people at arm's length. If you wanted to play the game, you had to send an email to Hellbent to be approved to try it out. You couldn't attempt to get a key all the time either. Hellbent Games would occasionally state that they were giving out free keys to anyone who sent an email, and if you wanted to play, you better hope you were one of the lucky few. Fortunately for me, ended up being one of those few. Now, the beta's launch didn't go well. We'll discuss the actual gameplay of VHS in a second, but first we have to discuss the numerous problems Video Horror Society had from the start. Bugs, crashed servers, outages, you name it. It seemed like Hellbent was not prepared for the game to hit beta at all, even though they announced it in confidence and out of the blue. They constantly needed to redistribute keys and codes to many people who weren't able to play, and players were annoyed, to say the least. Regardless of the many issues it had, the game still peaked at around 17,000 views on Twitch in December 2021, which is definitely nothing to sneeze at for a new and unproven game. However, even that soiled over time. Due to the devs taking a holiday break, no one would be getting any new keys and people started getting bored. Closed betas can and have worked for other games in the past, but if there's a significant time frame where people know they won't be able to play the game, everyone's just gonna move on to something else. Or move back, I guess, to Dead by Daylight. VHS hit a strong low in January, and the devs came back with some fire. A ton of keys were given in late January, early February, and the hype started to spike a little from the low it had stayed at. This was the time frame when I got my key and first tried the game out. I was intrigued, to say the least, so I opened up the launcher and gave it a go. VHS wears its inspiration from Dead by Daylight and wears it pretty proudly. From an outside glance, you could take a screenshot of both and probably convince someone that one is a mod for the other. First-person killer, or monster, third-person survivor, or teen, 2 hits to down, killer-specific abilities. The game undeniably took DBD into consideration and borrowed some ideas, and honestly that worked to its benefit. This made transitioning to VHS much easier for players who had been used to DBD, and removed some of the jank of getting used to a brand new game. Where VHS diverged from Dead by Daylight's formula was in the objectives survivors had to complete. There was an incredible focus on more offensive gameplay when it came to VHS. Instead of completing some boring objective and escaping with the chance of almost no interaction between both sides, you were forced to track down the killer and work as a team to slowly weaken the killer over time. The game had flaws, but I'd say the core gameplay design was actually more engaging than Dead by Daylight's. Forced interaction led to much closer games and clutch moments that felt rewarding and enjoyable to play. Well, it was in the beginning. The gameplay as the killer role was pretty much the same as what we're used to. Hit the survivor 2 times and pressure the team to save them. The only real issue with this was that there was nothing to do after you downed them, so the survivor was just forced to stay slugged until a teammate found them and picked them up. There was also this feed mechanic where the killer was encouraged to stand on top of the survivor they downed and fill up a rage meter that could be useful later. It wasn't a great idea, but it took forever to do, so the killer couldn't do it without consequences. Where the gameplay gets really interesting is in the survivor's objectives. As we all know, gameplay for the survivor side in most of these games can be boring. You stand still in an area and watch a bar slowly fill up over time. Video Horror Society had a little bit of that, but instead of those objectives pushing you closer to a method of escaping, completing those objectives gave you a method of attacking the killer. The killers in VHS had 4 different types of health: fire, electricity, holy, and demon or satanic. Now, I'm sure whatever remnants of the VHS community still remain will yell at me because at least one of the names is wrong, but I'll survive. These are close enough to do the job. Survivors were tasked with finding workstations around the map. Each workstation allows you to craft a weapon of one health type. For example, if you found a fire station, you'd only be able to craft a fire weapon. One of the coolest parts about VHS was that there were different types of weapons for each health style, which kept the game interesting and forced you to learn a variety of different playstyles. Once you had one of these weapons, you could damage the killer and make them weaker by removing one of their health types, which the killer could try to prevent by using a temporary shield ability and whatever they had at their disposal. Once you got enough damage on the killer, they would enter a banished mode where they could quickly float around the map while invisible to prevent losing another health type immediately. Once you lost one, you could never get it back. If survivors were able to remove all the health types, they won. While this could lead to situations where the person playing killer felt bullied, there was certainly counterplay you could use to fight back against the survivors and injure them, which injuring them stopped them from using any of their items. The pushing and the pulling of both sides gave the game a very interactive feel, which some other games in the genre really lacked. While there were issues the game had, like it being too hard to track a survivor after they were hit, weapon combos being occasionally unfair, and killer players feeling underpowered in some situations, the game still had a solid concept and people were enjoying it. The game may have had some dips in players, but that's nothing some solid updates and good word of mouth couldn't fix. Personally, I couldn't wait to see what they had in store. I really hope that they continue down the path of... I guess they're doing some server maintenance? I guess I'll check back in an hour or so. Okay, I don't know what's going on. Still in maintenance?
This is the most obnoxious thing I've ever experienced in my life.
Downtime for this long was unusual, to say the least. It couldn't be some regular server maintenance, right? So what could possibly be causing this? Oh, just a little thing called DDoSing. For those not in the know, a DDoS, or distributed denial of service attack, is an attempt to disrupt the normal traffic of a server by overflowing it with an abundance of internet traffic, making it so the server couldn't function. Something that is highly illegal and incredibly important to fix. Needless to say, Hellbent was not prepared to handle this. It was clear from how rocky the closed beta was that Hellbent was at least a little experienced with running a server with high traffic, so I'm assuming they were very easy targets. They needed to fix it fast, because every second it was down was another player they lost. How long did it take them? 3.5 months. VHS was unplayable for 3.5 months. Just picture that for a second. Imagine you're playing your favorite game and one day the game just goes belly up and you can't. Not for a day, not for a week, but for 3 months. That would be enough to severely damage even really popular games like Fortnite or CSGO, so imagine how much that hurt VHS. The devs were also extremely unclear about when the game would be playable again, so players couldn't even hold out hope for a specific time. The longer it took, the more players gave up. I'm not speaking from speculation either, I was one of those players. I was playing VHS one day and it crashed. I tried opening again and it gave me an error. I kept trying over and over again, spanning multiple days, maybe even a week, and I still couldn't play it. I gave up, and I wasn't alone in that. Even when it was finally able to be played again, and still in closed beta by the way, issues still kept popping up. I'm gonna list them quickly because I've spent so long talking about VHS already. The new issues that sprung up after the DDoSing was done were: Hellbent had to rebrand their game to Video Horror Society instead of VHS due to copyright, which, okay, being realistic, they should have seen coming. If I make a video game called Super Mario, I can't be shocked when I have a high-powered sniper rifle trained at my head by Nintendo Hit Squad.
Hello, Mario.
And also, that's why I've been referring to it as, Video Horror Society and VHS, because I use the two interchangeably, I don't know why. Anyway, next, the VHS Discord got hacked and was used to give people viruses. Okay, we're on to number 3 now, alright? They announced that the early access was ready to play, but people couldn't actually play it. They were just telling people it was ready, and it was only playable 2.5 weeks later. And then here's the last one, okay, the 4th issue. By the time players actually started getting to play the game, everybody who'd been playing since the closed beta was too good. So the newer players were giving up after a few games because they're getting absolutely stomped by the people who had been really experienced with the game. It wasn't just all of that either. I know. Shocking. An additional problem was that playing Killer was too damn hard once people knew what they were doing. This issue wasn't exactly apparent in the beginning, which is why I ended up enjoying it when I first started, as many people apparently did. You'd think that Survivor being more engaging would be a good thing for the game, but it ended up hurting in the long run. More people are going to be drawn to the less stressful role, which can cause a lot of problems as is, but the fact that Survivor was much more fun led to no one wanting to play Killer. Players quickly realized how strong survivors were if the killer didn't play perfectly, and the game became an unfair stomp fest. Video Horror Society was also too damn complicated to get into quickly, which didn't help at all. People were getting bored, no one wanted to play as the monster, and it showed in the queue times. Hellbent knew these things were issues, but it was too late at that point. The game had already died, and what little community remained were disappointed and angry, to say the least. Despite the fact that the visual representation of Video Horror Society's future would be lighting a truck on fire and backing it into a river, the devs still tried to make something work. They kept giving the game occasional updates and adding new characters here and there to hopefully keep players invested. It didn't work. You'd think something like Oddstarver making a video covering the new killer would help, but even that didn't stall the rapid downfall Hellbent was experiencing. They clearly knew what was going to happen, so they tried to drain VHS of every drop of money possible. As Hellbent watched the fire slowly consuming the forest around them, they realized that VHS was pretty much done for. As a result, it seemed like they were interested in making any money they could, as you'd expect from a dying game. The store was still open, allowing them to charge players for things like cosmetics. which ended up creating a big problem. Meet LilyPie101, a content creator who hangs around what I dub the asymmetrical sphere, which is just my way of saying she plays Dead by Daylight and usually tries other asymmetrical games that decide to enter the ring. Being in the sphere resulted in her crossing paths with VHS and, of course, Hellbent. Hellbent seemed to appreciate Lily's content and made her a rewinder, which, from what I've been told, are basically just VHS fog whisperers. I tried to look up what benefits being a rewinder came with, but I'm just met with a dead webpage when I try to find out. Anyway, one of these rewinder benefits was a completely custom outfit that was for the rewinder and other rewinders only. LilyPie asked about getting one of these cosmetics, to which Hellbent responded by asking her if she had any ideas. LilyPie didn't just give them ideas, but drew an entire design that she came up with. She sent the drawing to one of the devs, who responded by saying that they'd pass it on to their concept artists. Some time passed, and LilyPie decided to leave the program due to the declining state of the game, which, I don't think anyone can really blame her for. In February of this year, a whole 7 months after she sent the original concept, players opened the store and were met with this cosmetic. People were quick to notice this, and LilyPie herself even called this out the second she saw it. She posted about it publicly on Twitter, and people got pissed. I'm sure some of you are comparing and contrasting the designs and trying to pick them both apart to make some sort of defense for Hellbent, but I guess we'll never know exactly what they admitted to it.
Oh, Christ, are you kidding me?
Hellbent eventually reached out to Lily in private, confirming that it was her design, or at least an altered version of it, and removed it from the store while refunding anyone who bought it. At least to my knowledge, and what I could find. But the damage had already been done. Knowing that Hellbent was capable of doing something like this and only backed off when they got called out for it was incredibly damaging to their reputation, and just added on to all the shit they already had to worry about. I'm glad the design was removed and players were refunded, but that still doesn't change how the whole thing probably made Lily feel, as well as anyone else who was hurt that they did this. This was enough to make content creators a bit more cautious of working with Hellbent, and was concerning to the small amount of players that still played the game. Hellbent needed a plan, but they were running out of time. No matter what they did or whatever method they tried using to save the game, it didn't work. It was far too late and people had a hard time trusting Hellbent with their time or money. They managed to fend off a DDoS attack, but what if it happened again? Would it take just as long for them to fix it? Their Discord got hacked before, what if the game got hacked too? Would everyone's purchased cosmetics be lost in cyberspace for all eternity and they would, as a result, lose a lot of money? This uncertainty bled the rest of the game's community dry, and the game quickly faded into obscurity. Despite the weird and even asshole-ish behavior of the devs towards the end, it still is a damn shame the game ended the way it did. I firmly believe that Video Horror Society had a lot of potential that went completely untapped. As mentioned, there were balance issues, but at the core, the concept was still fun. This wasn't a home sweet home survive situation, where a lot of the core gameplay was just blatantly unfair. All VHS needed was some number tweaking here and there, and the game would have cemented itself as a fun competitor for Dead by Daylight. Even if the community never grew to astronomical size, I guarantee they, at the least, would have been able to keep a strong group of players that would keep the game alive, sort of like DBD did in its infancy. Unfortunately, we'll never know. The servers have been officially shut down, and the game is, for lack of a better term, dead and buried. I doubt the game will ever see some sort of revival. As the years roll by, we'll eventually forget about Video Horror Society and the trouble it went through, but for now, we can only imagine what it could have been. Finally, we can move on to a game that isn't dead yet. Oh. God damn it. Well, at least it still has a solid amount of players. I have a little bit of time. So, obviously the Texas Chainsaw Massacre is based on the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which is a very confusing sentence because they both have the same name. Yeah, there's no the game jokes here because the game is just the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which will probably become a problem down the line. Anyway, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the game, is based on the franchise of the same name. Specifically, from what I can tell, it takes a lot from the first movie. If you've never seen any of the movies, I'd recommend watching the first one at least, which is less of a slasher movie and more of an art house horror, as I'd call it, and it's a damn good movie. The film features a gang of young adults as they tour the rural South. Eventually, they find themselves being picked off one by a large man with a mask of skin and his cannibalistic family. So, basically just a normal vacation to Texas. The movie is an absolute classic, and if you're a horror fan, probably a must-watch. It's an amazing movie that spawned a franchise that has always kind of lived in its shadow because it's so good. And aesthetically, the game nailed it. It genuinely does make you feel like you're in one of the movies. I can feel the hot Texas sun beating on my face and the mosquitoes biting me at night. It's perfect. The graphics, lighting, and music do a very good job working together to create a full painting. The characters, at least the ones from the movies, all feel genuine and in character. Hell, they even did the work of throwing in a line for the cook, which explains why he's killing in the game, because he said he didn't like to in the first movie.
I don't much enjoy being violent, but I got no choice here.
That's good shit, and I'm glad they did the research to explain that. They also threw in some of Bubba's classic lines like concerned noises and sounds of affection, just for those really dedicated fans. Everything about the way this game looks and feels is great. It's just, the gameplay I have a problem with. Yeah, okay, wait, hold on. Just calm down for a second, okay? I know everybody's opinions about this game are going to be fresh because it's new, and I'm aware that freshness comes with a dangerous amount of thorns. Not only are people very passionate about their opinions regarding this game, but TCSM also already has a more toxic community than Dead by Daylight, which is honestly impressive. When it comes to this game, the conversations tend to get heated quickly, especially if you make the fatal error of comparing Dead by Daylight to the game, which is why I have to preface this section of the video by telling you that I am going to be doing that with this game, as I have for all the games I've previously talked about. If I was just making a review of Texas Chainsaw, I wouldn't mention Dead by Daylight at all, because I don't believe in comparing different things to determine whether one thing is better than the other, as that's a completely unrelated argument and derails any conversation in a direction it doesn't need to head towards. That being said, I'm not making a review of Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I'm taking an analytical look at some of Dead by Daylight's competitors and looking at what went wrong, or in this case, what could go wrong. I have to compare the two because otherwise this section of the video would be pointless. These opinions will be my own, not based on someone else's. I've been pouring hours into the game to make sure I know exactly how I feel about it and don't end up disagreeing with something down the line when I understand more. I mean, regardless, I'm still probably going to need to be careful with what I say here to avoid being crucified. I'll survive. This doesn't go for just me, by the way. Please be nice to each other in the comments. Don't tear each other's throats out over a video game, okay? Just be nice to each other, come on. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre has two sides, the family and the victims, who I'll actually be referring to as the family and the victims, because it'll be easier and less annoying to people who really like this game. I could get away with doing it for the other games, I just can't with this one. I'll talk about something for one side, and then I'll talk about it for the other. We'll keep it pretty simple here, because it gets kind of complicated. The goal of the victim is, obviously, to escape the family by any means, and there are a lot of means. Instead of a single path leading to only one or two methods of escaping, TCSM has a lot of variety in ways to escape. Sadly for the victims, the Sawyer family are big fans of locked doors and gates, so victims need to scour the property to find tools to help them. Conversely, the job of the family members is to... Wait, members? As in plural? Holy shit. Okay, real talk. It's actually really cool that TCSM changed up the formula by adding a team of killers instead of just the common single killer. Hats off to them for actually doing something risky and shaking things up. Anyway, the family member's job is to track down and kill the victims by preparing the map and working together to hunt down each one and turn them into tonight's dinner. Pretty simple concept, but not a bad one. While it may sound simple and by the book, the game is actually quite complicated at times. Unlike most other games in this genre, not only do the family members come with unique traits based on who you're playing, but the victims, Leland, Julie, Sunny, Anna, and have something unique about them to shake up playstyles. Leland is, in my opinion, the most fun. He features an ability that lets him barge into a family member, knocking them over like a Looney Tunes character and stunning them for an unfair amount of time. He's my personal favorite and is quickly becoming my go-to character, even if he is very bullshit to go against. His stun can be incredibly annoying since there's nothing you can do to avoid it. Julie can use her ability to basically become immune to characters with tracking abilities and reduces stamina while running. Basic, but somewhat effective depending on the situation. Sunny can use his ears. Anna's ability significantly reduces any damage received from attacks or falls, making you immune to poison while active. And finally, doesn't have to play the game. The family member... Okay, fine. Fuck it. I'll talk about... Connie's ability allows you to focus, as the game calls it, while unlocking a door, enabling you to perform an action that usually takes around 15 seconds to under half a second. Which doesn't sound too bad, but what it does do is free up a lot of time that the family needs to have. It also lets you unlock doors or gates mid-chase, which can feel blatantly unfair at times. We'll talk a bit more about that later. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre features 5 members of the Sawyer family. Leatherface, the cook, the hitchhiker, Sissy, and Johnny. Leatherface is the most recognizable and probably the one that runs into the most issues the game has. What separates Bubba from the rest of his psychotic family is that he's essential to every match, meaning someone has to pick him, regardless of whoever else is picked. This is because, I'm assuming, he's basically the face of the franchise and you wouldn't want a game without him. To give an explanation for Bubba being essential, they have him being the only character that spawns in the basement with the victims, allowing him to pressure them and make it harder for them to get out easily. There's just one problem. Bubba can't really pressure the victims, at least not very well. Bubba is a large boy, and as a result, he can't fit in the tight spaces that the victims can. So what ends up happening is you run into a lot of dead ends and situations where, as Leatherface, you can't really do much to pressure anyone. You can distract one victim well enough if you manage to find someone who isn't hiding, but you're not a one-man army. This creates an issue where, while you might find someone to distract, everyone else is getting out because they have free reign of the basement, which has a labyrinth-like structure that stops you from easily finding anyone else. I understand that the point isn't to kill the victims right away, as I'm sure people would find that incredibly annoying, but they overclocked it to the point where Bubba doesn't really pose any tangible threat. This makes him sort of the laughingstock because this problem doesn't just extend to when he's in the basement at the start of a match, but to everything else. Tight squeezes and crawl spaces are pretty much present everywhere, meaning Bubba will just hit dead end after dead end. You can destroy open crawl spaces, in all fairness, but by the time you eliminate all you can, the game is basically over anyway, and even if it isn't, it gives the victims ample time to run somewhere that hasn't been touched yet. Bubba can hit like a truck, which can be very effective, don't get me wrong, it's just getting the opportunity to land those hits can be very hard a lot of the time. He can also destroy these obstacles that the victim can climb over, which only he can do anything about, but they basically just serve as another thing to waste his time. I'll save more of the chase stuff for later. For now, let's move on to someone else. The cook is probably universally accepted as the best, or at least one of the best. The cook, like everyone else other than Bubba, is intended to prepare the house and its defenses before the victims get out of the basement, if you somehow manage to have enough time to do that. What makes Saul Goodman here so good is that he not only has the ability to activate a listening mode, where he can tag any victim not paying attention to how much noise they're making, so like Sunny's ability but actually good, but he can also add a lock to some doors, which can waste the victim's time by creating the necessity to find a lockpick if they don't already have one, and creates another 15 seconds of wasted time for the victims. Unless they're Connie. Like Bubba, he can't fit into tight spaces, but he's actually good enough to make up for it. The hitchhiker features abilities similar to the victims, as he can fit in crawl spaces and in tight gaps, allowing him to be a dangerous pursuer if you aren't running with the destination in mind. To be fair, he doesn't hit too hard, but he can be a real asshole clencher if he's on your trail. He also has the ability to set small bone traps pretty much anywhere he wants to. These traps feel kind of dumb, like they don't do much, and when they do, it feels more like blind luck than anything. I mean, I like him because I used to be a trapper main, and I'll always get satisfaction from trapping someone even if they don't do anything. When playing Hitchhiker, you'll want to set traps and choke points where the victims will have a hard time getting around them, which can be quite helpful to your family members if they can chase victims to them. Other than that, he can be quite hit or miss depending on the situation. Sissy, like the Hitchhiker, can also traverse through crawl spaces and tight gaps, as well as having a few other other abilities. Sissy specializes in poison that she can spray to disorient and slow down victims, as well as showing their locations to the rest of the family. These poison clouds remain for a bit of time and are mostly effective when blocking off key objectives like car batteries, generators, and some locked doors. While these clouds do disperse, they can buy you much needed time in some cases and can be used to block some areas that victims keep running through, like if someone keeps using a crawl space or gap and is refusing to leave. Sissy can also poison tools like the fuse and medicine, but you'll rarely see a use from doing this, so it's probably better to avoid it. Sissy and the Hitchhiker work best as family members who can get a few quick hits on victims and make them more vulnerable to the more savage members of the family. And finally, there's Johnny. Johnny feels kind of pointless. I mean, he has the same traits as Bubba or the Cook, where he has a really hard time traversing the map and hits dead end after dead end, but he doesn't really have the power to make up for it, like the Cook does. The question is, if Bubba is necessary to start a game, then what's even the point of playing Johnny? I mean, he hits hard and heavy, but so does Bubba. All his power really does is let him track people, and not even very well. He's basically the Cook, but dog shit. I'm not sure what the point of his ability is. I might be misunderstanding it, so please let me know if I am, but this guy just seems like he's not very good. I should probably mention that besides killing the victims, obviously, there's a secondary goal that the family members have, which is to feed Grandpa, this old fossil who just sits on his lazy ass all day. You collect blood by either damaging victims or finding little blood buckets around the map. Feeding Grandpa causes him to yell and reveal the locations of any victims moving. Once you reach the max level of 5, Grandpa can reveal the victims' locations regardless of whether or not they're moving. In addition to that, leveling up Grandpa also unlocks whatever abilities you have selected before the game. The higher level Grandpa is, the stronger the family becomes, to put it simply. Now you might say, well, Skrump, that sounds pretty good. And it is. Except for the fact that victims can literally stab Grandpa, reverting his level back and making any abilities he has given you moot for the time he is immobilized. As annoying as it sounds, I don't hate this mechanic. Maybe there's something to be said about the victim's ability to do it being instant, and with Grandpa only revealing the victim's locations when they're right in front of him, but that's not a conversation I care to have. I should mention real quick, one thing that really grinds my gears about this game is that it feels the need to show me a cutscene of Grandpa waking his crusty ass up every single time. Was the message at the top not enough? Like, why do I have to visibly see it? It completely neuters the flow of the game and can even do really annoying things like causing Bubba's chainsaw to overheat, which, as you can imagine, is incredibly annoying. I really hope they remove this at some point, because my god, I don't know how much more of it I could take. I suppose it's also pretty important to mention that these character-specific powers can be upgraded through a leveling system. Stuff like power cooldown and length can be improved with varying effectiveness depending on who you are. For example, the duration that Leland stuns a family member when using his power can be increased to 12 seconds, which sounds pretty crazy, but the default is 10 seconds, which is still crazy. Editing Skrump here, just coming in real quick to tell you that Leland's stun has been nerfed to a maximum of 8 seconds, which is good. It's definitely a lot better than 12 seconds. I mean, that's a whole 4-second difference, but I still think 8 seconds is far too long for a stun in a game like this, but my opinion on Leland doesn't really change. Anyway, enjoy the rest of the video. This game is downright wacky. Luckily, they nerfed things like Connie's power to have a max 240-second cooldown, which was a pretty good call. I mean, her power is still ass to go against, but, you know, it's nice that they at least addressed it a little bit. In addition to these power, or ability, I guess, upgrades, there are also perks in the game that can be used to switch up how you play. Unfortunately, there are too many here to talk about, but my personal favorite is the one that gives you the chance of a lockpick not breaking when you use it to a max of 50%. Great. Anyway, some of these upgrades and perks are pretty good, but since most players don't really use them, or at least it's hard to tell when they're using them, it's pretty difficult to tell how unfair they are. Okay, so I'm gonna talk about balance here. I know. Sacrilege. Yeah, I don't know. When it comes to this game, people act like wanting the game to be balanced is some kind of hate crime and will be complete assholes about it. I won't dwell on it long because I already have a section in the beginning about it, but I will talk about this very briefly. I understand that the devs have specifically stated that they want this game to be a party game, and that's totally cool. I respect that choice and agree it's probably the correct call, but that being said, balance is still important when it comes to making a game fun for the long term. The game doesn't have to be balanced like a competitive game, but it should still be good enough that players don't feel like they're being cheated constantly. So just bear with me. I'll try to make sure these criticisms are fair, or at least you can see where I'm coming from when I'm making these criticisms. So, chases in this game are, I'd say, a little weird. I've already talked about Bubba and the countless hurdles he has to deal with if he wants to catch people, but that's intentional, or at least I think. You see, having 3 different family members in a match who can catch all 4 victims on their own would be blatantly unfair. So, Sumo Digital, the creators of the game, tried to find a workaround. Leatherface, the cook, and Johnny all run into the same problems of crawl spaces and tight gaps, which Sissy and the hitchhiker deal with pretty easily, but don't damage the victims enough per hit to kill them quickly. Together, though, they become a real threat and can sandwich victims into instant death. It's without a doubt a smart idea. It creates the necessity for the family members to work together to catch people, which fits thematically. However, what ends up happening is, if there are 2 family members chasing one person, that leaves only 1 family member to keep an eye out for everyone else. And you might say, well, the chase should end a lot quicker if there are 2 people chasing one person, which would be true, but that entirely depends on where the chase is taking place. In this game, where time is incredibly important, each second you spend not making sure every single exit is locked and protected is potential progress someone is making towards leaving, which can be done in under 2 minutes if you know what you're doing as a victim. You won't be able to commit to any chases unless victims are running without a plan, as they'll waste your precious time. I haven't even mentioned the variety of defenses victims have against every family member, like the wells, shivs you can get from bone piles, and door stuns, which can be performed multiple times on one door. I get that you're not supposed to be able to eliminate a victim the first time you look in their general direction and are instead supposed to wither them down over time, but the games usually don't last that long anyway. They tend to not even feel like chases. They either feel like watching butter slowly slide down a hill if you're alone, or an absolute massacre when working with someone else. The focus on working with a team while playing as a family member is fine. It sucks for me because I tend not to play with friends and just queue with random people who are either AFK or finagling the camera to get a view of Sissy's ass, but I can accept that that's just the risk of playing a team-based game. My issue is that victims don't have to work together when the game should definitely be incentivizing them to. Victims in this game can be entirely self-dependent if they want, which can create some very unenjoyable matches where you barely see victims at all. Every action a victim can perform, like unlocking doors, searching for tools, disabling a generator, using healing items, and pretty much everything else can be done without the help from any of their teammates, which would be totally fine if there was at least some benefit to working together that would incentivize victims to collaborate to finish something specific. But there isn't. You can hand other victims items sometimes, but that will rarely happen. They might as well just find those things on their own to avoid wasting time, which will always be the optimal thing to do. Okay, here we go. I'm gonna compare this game to Dead by Daylight. I know. Get your gas mask, get your barf bags. Here we go. In Dead by Daylight, you can do the main objective on your own without the help from others. But this comes with the negative of things taking longer if you decide to make that choice. Here's the thing though. That's the smart thing to do because it stops the killer from being able to pressure multiple people. However, there are a few things you'll need help with, like healing or being unhooked, forcing you to work together if the killer is doing their job well. Texas Chainsaw has none of that. Injured players can just find medicine on their own and start looking for it as soon as they get away from any family members, which the game allows them to do because it's almost impossible to track down people once they escape your line of sight, especially when it comes to the basement or night maps. Even with characters like Johnny or the cook who specialize in tracking people, you'll still have a difficult time because those characters have to stop to use their abilities, meaning victims will still be making distance at the very least. There's no penalty for doing things on your own as a victim, but the consequences are disastrous if you make that choice while playing as a family member. Another big thing I tend to have problems with is in the various tools that victims have at their disposal. We've already talked about lockpicks a little bit, and they're pretty basic. My only problem with lockpicks being the way they are is that multiple can be grabbed from the same location, meaning you can just spam E and grab 2 lockpicks with almost no effort, which is a much bigger deal than it seems. I also think it's a little silly that the action of opening a lock has 2 checkpoints despite the fact that unlocking a door only takes 15 seconds. Speaking of which, I'm not sure 15 seconds, roughly, it's not exact, is a good amount of time for such an important objective. In a lot of cases, there are only 3 or so doors that you need to unlock before you can leave the Sawyer property, meaning that it can take a total of 45 seconds of objective time, which is not nearly enough. But not only that, certain perks even remove a good amount of the downtime caused by needing to look for lockpicks, which is crazy. I mean, I've already talked about one of them. Let's move on from lockpicks, or tools, unlocking tools, whatever they're called, you know. The tool that I think causes the most problems are the shivs that you can find in these little bone piles around the map. Once again, these bone piles can be used multiple times by the same person. I mean, you can stock up on 2 if you really want to. Shivs, or sharp bones, whatever they're fucking called, can be used to stun a family member temporarily, sort of like Leland's stun. The only difference is that you need to be facing the back of a family member to do it. These feel like absolute shit to go against. Yes, the most obvious counter is just to keep an eye on what's behind you, but that can become very hard when focusing on something else. Not only are people able to sneak up behind you a lot of the time, but there are situations where a victim can end up getting a stun on you regardless of whether you know they're there or not. This is mostly the fault of the third-person camera that the game forces you to use as a family member. Like I mentioned with Home Sweet Home, having a camera like that as a killer role leads to a lot of wild swinging because it's super difficult to gauge distance when you can't exactly see what's in front of your character. Because your character lunges every time you swing at an enemy, missing can create an opportunity where the victim can circle around you and get the stun off, which is incredibly annoying because it doesn't feel like something you could have prevented, at least not most of the time. It ends up feeling like I need to prevent myself from getting trick stabbed by a spy in TF2, which feels really weird. You want me to constantly be watching my back while in intense chases with victims?
What a sick joke!
Adding this to the fact that stuns in this game are way too damn long, and you feel like you get punished all the time as a family member for no fault of your own. And then there are first aid kits or medicine. These little... Jesus Christ, that was bad. Okay, listen, was it actually a voice crack? I'm sick. That's what that was, yeah. These little bottles you can find can either be a big heal or a small heal. These are fine. The only issue I have is that once a victim gets a tiny bit of distance, they can use these to get a lot of health back pretty quickly. I don't really blame that on the medicine though. It seems way more like a level design problem, but who knows. I mentioned it before, but I'll mention it again. I understand that this game isn't supposed to be looked at with the analytical eye I'm using, but that's the whole point, isn't it? Once you play this game enough to realize how unfair and unfun it can be, the magic of the whole process goes away. Even when playing this game for the franchise and nothing else, it still feels bad because it comes across less like the Sawyer family is a band of terrifying cannibals who are hard to get away from, and instead a bunch of bumbling idiots constantly tripping over their own balls. They fall over like a sack of bricks the second a door is closed too fast, which is fine. I don't believe in the whole power roll nonsense, but as a fan of the franchise, I'm sure it doesn't feel great. I'm not exactly sure who this game is made for. For new players, it doesn't feel good because it's impossible to navigate in the basement as a victim, and it becomes too easy once you know how to navigate even with bad teammates, and playing as the family feels even worse because you feel incapable on your own, creating the necessity of talking on comms to people who might not even be listening. And all of this is obviously worse for people who are high level or competitive, which I know aren't the focus. They want this game to be a party game, but I don't see any real evidence of that. There's just too much broken shit to have fun playing with friends, and unlike Friday the 13th, you aren't even able to get enjoyment out of something like proximity chat. It feels like they wanted to go the direction of Dead by Daylight, even if they stated the opposite, but they didn't do it right. It seems like they wanted the best of both worlds, and as a result ended up with a product that feels hollow. There are so many design choices that feel weird and out of place for a party game. Pixelbush's video on TCSM states it pretty well.
To play this casual, funny, goofy party game, you need to be on constant voice comms to get help from your teammates, or the other side sometimes becomes invincible, which encourages you to play with pre-made and use regular callouts like a competitive team would. You've got to see how that's inherently more competitively minded than many would have you believe. It's a gameplay mechanism that punishes you for not being optimised, which is more or less the antithesis of what West pertains to want for the game.
If the developers really wanted this game to be casually played and by extension a party game, then they have a really funny way of showing it. This game has some odd choices that make me feel like they want this game to be played one way but haven't committed to it. They seem to at least be listening to the community in some regard, as the recent patch notes have shown, but who knows how long the game will continue to last if they don't address everything super quickly. And don't even get me started on them moderating their own subreddit. Like, why did they think that was a good idea? Oh god, I'm not even gonna talk about that. That's just stupid. The worst part is, it's not fair. I'm not talking about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but the market of asymmetrical games. Dead by Daylight has had 7 years to build a very effective formula with almost no competition and have been able to grow without the need to survive. I know it's been memed to shit at this point, but DBD is the only game that allows you to play as Pinhead on RPD, facing against Ellen Ripley, Cheryl Mason, Steve Harrington, Laurie Strode, and no game will ever be able to do that, at least not soon. And no, I'm not counting Fortnite. They're two totally different games with different target audiences. Dead by Daylight was terribly balanced for years after it came out, and some still may consider it wildly unfair, which isn't a wrong opinion to have. However, even while being very unfair for the years it's been out, a solid community was built around it because there simply wasn't anything else like it to play. They were able to build a dedicated and unhealthily addicted community because they couldn't go anywhere else, giving behavior ample time to fuck around and not do anything until they were forced to get their act together. Sumo Digital and every other company that has made an asymmetrical game doesn't have that freedom. Like it or not, Dead by Daylight is the most balanced asymmetrical game on the market, even when it has glaring issues that need to be fixed. When a new asymmetrical game comes out, if it's not perfectly balanced, people are just going to flock back to DBD once they start noticing. Most players have sunk in enough hours into DBD to have some commitment to it, and things like new chapters and reworks are enough to keep players around with the idea that something bothering them can be fixed in the next update. Okay, let me cool down for a second. I swear to God, the more days I spend recording this audio, the sicker I'm getting. Like, one more day and I'm gonna turn into fucking Arthur Morgan. Okay, let me quickly cover my general thoughts on Texas Chainsaw Massacre because I kind of left out a definitive opinion in my script, so let me just talk about what I actually think about it. Is the game bad? No, it's not a bad game. Is it good? You know, it's not bad. Okay, the game is fun. That I cannot deny. The game is fun, but it's sort of a dumb fun where as soon as you start thinking about it, it becomes less enjoyable. It's fun to turn on and play. Like I've been playing it. I have had a good time playing the game, but I just don't see that lasting very long because there are some things that are really starting to pile up and annoy me. I hope the game does well. I hope that the game continues to have a player base even though it's dipping, but even then they can still keep a consistent amount of players because Dead by Daylight does need some competition. If I have to wait another 3 months or 6 months or for another fucking skull merchant, I'm going to lose my mind. Back to the original statement of this video. Is Dead by Daylight dying? Like I said, no. There's absolutely no reason to believe that. The Steam charts show well enough that the game is doing just fine as is. But can Dead by Daylight even die? If every asymmetrical game has failed up to this point, I mean, TCSM hasn't failed, but it's not looking great, what chance is there that another game comes along and takes the spot? Well, almost zero. Dead by Daylight is well established, popular, and able to bring in new players and keep them thanks to things like simple concept and fan favorite characters. A new game would be contending with a giant that has shown time and time again that they can survive against even the strongest competition. It would be like putting up my 4-year-old niece against Mike Tyson. There's no shot. If anything is going to kill DBD, it's going to be behavior. Either they'll become complacent and stop adding things, making the community rot from the inside over time, or they'll start making decisions that the majority of people don't like and quit the game as a result. I doubt a fancy new game will do it, but I've learned only idiots say always and never, so I'm not going to say either. So, burnout. We mentioned burnout in the beginning, which is a state of mental, physical, or emotional exhaustion which makes things you may have once enjoyed seem more like chores to be completed. Dead by Daylight players experience this to an unhealthy degree. Because no game can hold a candle to DBD, and even if they do, the candle quickly burns out and the status quo is restored, and we've talked about why that is. But what can we do to counter burnout? The easy and cheeky answer is just to say, play something else, which sounds like a very unhelpful response, but it really isn't. The best way to get over burnout is to spend time away from whatever is causing you to feel exhausted, which is DBD in this case. Maybe spending time playing something like Baldur's Gate 3, Starfield, or Mortal Kombat 1 just to switch things up would help. Hell, Spider-Man 2 is right around the corner, maybe you could give the first game a shot if you haven't. And if you're craving that asymmetrical fix, I would recommend Texas Chainsaw if you haven't played it. There are a lot of different games out there to try, and it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world if you played something else for a little while. Unfortunately, content creators can't really take a break because they make a living playing Dead by Daylight, and that's where the situation gets a little dicey because they obviously can't just stop playing the game when they want to, which is why big DBD content creators are usually the most burnt out. So if you're in a situation where you can't stop playing Dead by Daylight because of that reason or another, maybe doing something else within the borders of the game would help. Try a new build, go for a stupid but fun challenge, or work on mastering a killer you've barely played. There's a lot to do in Dead by Daylight, and even if you've done all you think you can, new content is being added all the time, allowing you to try new things consistently. Trust me, I know it sucks, but maybe there's still something you can find to make the experience less exhausting. That, or there's always Civ 5.